The regulated trading of commodities has a long history in the United States, including playing a central role in the 1983 Commodity Trading Places, but in recent years the practice has taken new forms, essentially making it possible for online marketplaces where de facto betting is allowed on everything from the words in presidential addresses to cricket competitions across the globe. But the future of platforms like Kalshi and Polymarket are up in the air as states look to reassert their regulatory authority over sports gambling, questions are raised about insider trading, and concerns are voiced about the types of prediction markets that are available. For more on this evolving story, we're joined in the Capitol Press Room studio by Jimmy Vielkind, a Capitol reporter with WNYC and Gothamist, who recently did a deep dive into the topic. Thanks for making the time, Jimmy.
Happy to be here, Dave.
So for listeners who aren't commodity traders or haven't explored sites like Kalshi, can you give us a high-level explanation of how these online prediction marketplaces work and who has traditionally had oversight of the space?
Sure. Well, let me start with a big disclaimer that I am not a commodity trader, and I've never placed a trade or a bet, whatever phrase you want to use, on a prediction market site. It's just not really my jam. These things, they kind of, why don't we start with like a financial market, right? So the price of beef fluctuates over time. And if I am someone like the McDonald's Corporation, I am going to buy a lot of beef. So I want to basically buy contracts for my beef on the long term. And then if beef is going to go down, the price of beef is going to go down, you can buy hedges against that. Mm-hmm. And so long-term contracts for commodities, be they grains or corn or anything, have been traded and existed really since the latter half of the 19th century. Remember, you referenced Trading Places. About 100 years earlier, if we're thinking about grain being grown in the heartland, one of the big innovations was that the grain you're selling by the side of a little railroad depot in Kansas is actually priced in Chicago.
Sure.
Where they're thinking about what is the global price of grain, and your grain is no better than any other grain. So we've been trading on commodities for a long time, anything from gold, beef, etc. And now you're trading on the probabilities of future events. So the way this works is Kalshi or Polymarket ask a question. Will Dave Lombardo say the word banana pants during the course of his interview with Jimmy Vielkind? And you can ask this question, you can put it and create a market. And people will essentially buy one version of the answer. They'll buy a contract on one version of the answer. They'll say, okay, I hold the position that Dave will say banana pants during the interview. And you are assigned certain odds. You're assigned a certain probability. That is a little unlikely that you would use that random phrase. So it would probably have a high payout, right? Sure. Someone would say like, yeah, I'm going to bet that he's not going to say that. But then once I say the word banana pants, and Dave has this little gleam in his eye, though the inner 9-year-old is active there, all of a sudden, what's going to happen? The odds change over time. Mm-hmm. And so the argument is that this is not a simple bet. It's not a single moment in time where you go to one other person or where you go to a house, either a bookie or a casino or whomever is going to be holding the cards, that you are trading a position just like the price of beef, only you're trading the odds of Dave saying banana pants in the interview. What was that word, Dave?
I can't remember. Okay. I know it wasn't banana hammock, but at some time I'll have to check the tape. But given the history of this and its evolution, does that mean we still rely on the Federal Commodity Futures Trading Commission?
That's right.
To regulate all this?
Exactly, because what the CFTC, which was actually created in the early part of the 20th century, says is that this is essentially akin to what I've been describing. These can be looked at as derivatives, which is a certain type of financial instrument, and they have asserted regulatory authority over these prediction markets. Since President Trump took office, the CFTC has basically actively talked about how it wants to encourage these markets. But all these things that I'm describing, all these future event contracts, let's say if we were talking about sports, if I were to have the bet that Aaron Judge would hit 3 home runs in a game, that's a potential thing that is exactly a prediction contract on a future possible event. And again, the price would probably shift over time. After Aaron Judge hit 1 home run,
Sure.
2 home run, if the Yankees are playing against another team like the Mets, God forbid, I'm sure the odds would be much higher that Judge would get it done. But that's also thought of as gambling. And in the United States, gambling regulations have been delegated explicitly to the states. And here in the great state of New York, the New York State Gaming Commission has asserted that all betting or all future trading activities on Polymarket and Kalshi infringe upon its right to regulate contracts or to regulate sports betting and sports gambling, which, as we all know, it has done vigorously over time and has extensive regulations and safeguards that they put in place for all kinds of things since this has been legalized in recent years.
And it's not just the State Gaming Commission, as you point out, that's interested in this. The State Attorney General's office has gotten involved as well, which you reported on.
That's right. So what happened was last year, the State Gaming Commission sent a cease and desist letter to Kalshi, which until the end of last year was really the main regulated prediction market operating in the United States. Polymarket is structured differently. It has been more international. It's been a little bit more freewheeling. It does have a regulated U.S. subsidiary, Polymarket US. And so last year, the focus from the Gaming Commission was on Kalshi exclusively. Now, what we are seeing is more companies, more cryptocurrency-rooted financial firms are starting to get into the prediction market business. So Attorney General Tish James last month filed lawsuits against Coinbase and Gemini, saying that their offerings amounted to unlawful gambling. So she essentially sued to have them shut down. The companies have moved to make this a federal question. The companies say that they are properly federally regulated. And it was that move by Attorney General James that prompted the CFTC, that federal regulatory body, to sue New York. So now New York was suing companies for the right to regulate, and the federal regulator has sued New York saying, no, we are the regulator. We're the only name in town that works. This is also playing out in other states, if you want to talk about that.
Well, yeah, you have highlighted how New York is not alone looking to assert its authority. More than a dozen states have raised issues with the regulatory landscape and the way it's being handled. But I want to stick closer to home. And you explored possible legislative responses from state lawmakers. And before we get to what that might look like, here's what State Senator Jeremy Cooney, a Rochester area Democrat, told you about the status quo.
Where's the accountability? Where's the oversight? Well, okay, CFTC has oversight. Where's the hearings? Where is the good government accountability? There's none of that. And so, I think the cat's out of the bag. These are enormously popular. And so any sort of legislation or push to ban prediction markets, that's just not productive. What is productive is we have a sophisticated agency in New York State, whether we're talking about cryptocurrency or other types of fintech innovation that has experience with setting up regulatory frameworks. I think they should do that for these markets.
And you report that Senator Jeremy Cooney has advanced a bill that would require a license from the State Department of Financial Services to operate a prediction market. What's your sense of how far-reaching something like that could be, given the ambiguity about the state's ability to even regulate something like this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question that often comes up with sort of leading-edge technologies, right? I'm old enough to remember when DraftKings and FanDuel were all the rage with daily fantasy sports, and everyone was like, what is this? Is this gambling? Is it not gambling? Is it something in between? And what usually happens is a place like New York, which has well-honed regulatory muscles and regimes, they usually say, no, stop. But there are other places that are a little bit more permissive around the country that let things go. So what we often see are states as laboratories for regulation, and you have different regulatory schema in the different areas of the country. Companies generally don't like that. They like to have one regulator, one single set of rules, because it just makes it easier for them to operate on a larger scale and therefore make more profit.
And they typically like to have those rules written by the people that are maybe the most sympathetic to what they're trying to do.
That's absolutely right. One thing that I should note, and this is something that Senator Cooney brought up, is that Donald Trump Jr., the son of Donald Trump Sr., who is a federal official who occupies the White House right now, is an advisor to both Kalshi and Polymarket. And I believe an investment firm that he is has a stake in has invested in Polymarket. So there are some clear ties between Donald Trump Jr. and these companies, which has fueled suspicion among some legislators, including Democrats like Cooney, that maybe an arm of the Trump administration is not the best person or best entity to be regulating these new markets. So the federal government, it's an open question as to whether or not they are overly sympathetic, right? The CFTC says that it takes insider trading very seriously. Last month, it brought a case against a U.S. Army soldier who was accused by federal prosecutors in Brooklyn of using non-public insider information about the operation which captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro earlier this year. So this person was federally charged, but then the CFTC as a regulator also stepped in and took a regulatory action saying this is impermissible insider trading. But on the other hand, people like Cooney are saying like, well, all kinds of this stuff is happening all over the place. Where is the tradition? Where are things going, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, and New York Governor Kathy Hochul has stepped into that space with regarding insider trading and issued an executive order. Can you explain what she's looking to target there?
Yes. So already the regulated exchanges say that you can't basically do insider trading. And there are different statutory constructions on that. But basically, if you have knowledge of an event, like, you yourself could not bet on whether or not you're going to say, what was the word? Do you remember the word?
I can't remember at this point.
Okay. I think it was banana pants. So just wondering.
Have to check the tape.
Yeah. So it's theoretically already unlawful and against the rules for people to be doing this. Governor Hochul set out an executive order which barred people from executive New York State agencies from using any non-public information they may have to place bets on these prediction markets. So sort of creating a state-level sanction in addition to the platform prohibitions or in addition to the federal penalties that would theoretically accompany any kind of insider trading.
In reporting the story out, did anyone raise any concerns about the types of markets that are available on these platforms? You referenced the fact that someone was able to bet on whether a president of a country would be deposed, but there are other things that might call into question how our elections are run. Even here in New York, you can bet on who might be the nominee in a race or the outcome of that race. Has anyone expressed any concerns about that aspect of things?
Yeah, some people have said that it's just very unseemly, and they've questioned whether it's necessary. So one of the people I spoke with in reporting this story is a guy named Robin Hanson. He's a professor of economics at George Mason University, and he's considered kind of one of the founding fathers of prediction markets. He seemed to be very much coming at it from a libertarian perspective, and he said markets are really good at providing information. If you open something up and you let people essentially use the wisdom of the crowd, you can discern quite a bit about what is going to happen in a particular space by seeing what the price is and seeing where the odds point. And you can see there's a lot of utility in that, right? Like, will oil go up or down, right? That's an important question that has implications for governments that have to spend money on gas for vehicles, et cetera. And so having a prediction market kind of is thought of as a good way to make predictions, to inform decisions, even for people who don't put any money in and don't make any bets. On the other hand, what is the utility of asking whether or not Dave Lombardo is going to say banana pants on the air? I mean, I find it funny, but other than that, I don't think there's any utility.
No.
And so why should we be betting on this? So there's that argument that, well, why are we even doing this, right? You're letting people spend money on what is arguably something stupid. Hanson's rebuttal to that is like, okay, well then don't spend your money on it if you don't think it's stupid. But if other people think it's not stupid, have at it.
Well, moving forward, given the fact that you've been around the block a few times here in New York State government, as you referenced earlier, how do you think the state will approach this, given the fact that there are so many existing sports gambling operators who have a market that they have carved out for themselves and was regularly protected given the state's restrictions on gambling in the Constitution, as well as we pointed out, the State Gaming Commission's approach to regulating gambling? I mean, do you think they're going to end up pushing their shoulder into an aggressive state approach, or might they make the calculation, hey, I'd like to be in the prediction markets industry, and therefore I'm fine with you guys taking a hands-off approach because I'd like to be here too?
You know, that's a really good question. So far, we haven't seen some of the traditional sports betting companies really lean into this question, at least not that I've seen in disclosure reports. It seems like many things, New York's government is not on the cutting edge of what the kids say is cool and what the technology allows. So we're slowly kind of ramping up to this question. I do think that something might get done because we are seeing Governor Hochul engage in a way that she doesn't always. In addition to that executive order, Hochul had a very strong response in support of Attorney General James's lawsuits against both Gemini and Coinbase, which were filed last month. So I think there's probably political will to do something. I could also see it being an instance where there's some kind of a settlement where prediction markets don't offer sports contracts in the state of New York, and where they take steps to assure that users in the state of New York are 21 instead of 18, as is currently allowed.
Sure.
21 is, of course, the threshold for these sports betting sites. So there does seem to be some kind of a compromise. But also, I think that all sides of this issue are going to look at their legal cases. They're going to look at the landscape of which judges they're going to make them in front of and see, well, if I have a shot at winning everything in court, why am I going to even bother with kind of playing around on this legislative front?
Well, we've been speaking with Jimmy Vielkind. He is a capital reporter with WNYC and Gothamist. Jimmy, thanks for visiting us.
Thanks, Dave. But please, call me Banana Pants.
Next time. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.